the show The Awakening, and we're put on by WGSN-DB, the Going Bold, and the Going Solo Network. And my name's Tina Huggins. I'm your divorce coach specialist and restorative mediator. And this is Joe Huggins. And today we're graced by wonderful Victoria Kirilloff. We practiced this just beforehand to make sure I would mess it up just good. So anyways, today's topic or today's story is a story of death. And so we're starting off a little bit light because some of this is going to get a little bit heavy as Victoria tells her story. And so Victoria, you and I have talked about your story, so I know a lot of the story. And Joe's never heard your story before, so this will be his first time to hear the story. And so as you're telling the story, if it's okay for one or the other of us to ask questions.
Please.
Okay, great. So Victoria, go ahead and tell us a little bit about the client that you have the story of.
Yeah, so I happen to be in an interesting position with my profession. I am a certified divorce financial analyst, and my job is to help parties get their hands around the finances of divorce. Divorce is really a four-part equation. There's the emotional and the social side that you best when you work with a coach like Tina and Joe, but then there's the finances, which really are where a lot of the problems lay. And that's best handled by a certified divorce financial analyst like myself. And then finally, there's the legal component to it. And a lot of people can make the legal portion go easy once they actually know how to break it down into these different segments. And so divorce is primarily a financial transaction. And I deal a lot with women and men that have substantial means, but for whatever reason during the marriage, they were not able, they didn't handle that part of the pie. So the other person did, and now they're going through divorce, or maybe they worked so hard that they just spent their money and kind of lived by the seat of their pants. Now, as they navigate this divorce process, they're having to financially uncouple, and it is so overwhelming. And so I was very fortunate to come into one of my clients' life when she was going through her first divorce, and she had no idea how much money she was spending. She made a lot of it, and so she just was writing checks and, taking care of her family and taking care of everyone around her. And she was a high-powered woman. She absolutely was a killer. I mean, she was an attorney. She was going up in federal judge all the time, or in federal court all the time, and sitting in front of federal judges. So this woman dealt with, top of the line apex predators. And she was so sweet and caring and kind to me. And I took it upon, it was my job to not only help her through her first divorce and to figure out what it was going to look like for her to have a successful post-divorce life. We had such a successful transition during that time. And, we came to a really quick conclusion with her ex-husband that she wanted to continue to work with me after her divorce was over. And so she had a very interesting life where she was running around, really focusing on building her business, and didn't have, liked the fact that her husband was taking care of the finances, didn't like the fact how he was spending the money. And so then going through the divorce, she realized she needed a financial partner. And so she used to call me her financial husband. And we had a great relationship where, we would sit together and kind of reconcile, her life every month and figure out, what bills she needed to pay and what new things I needed to help her with. And she was so capable in her professional life that when she moved on after the divorce, she just kind of, moved on as quickly as possible. And she unfortunately fell into a relationship with her boyfriend that was incredibly toxic to her. It was not healthy in the slightest. And she took a lot on, because she was so capable in her first job, in her day job, she took on that role when she went home. And so she ended up with a partner that was very well, just took advantage of her. He didn't have a job. He, kind of inflated what his career was. And, she fell into the cycle of love. Well, the cycle of abuse, right? Which it all starts with love. And it was so hard for her because the beginning was just stereotypical love bombing, and he was an artist, and so he was making up all of these wonderful pieces that he made for them and weaving this tale, and she fell head over heels in love with this man. And that's when he started to get his claws into her, and she knew that there were some things that didn't quite mix, didn't match up. And she was very mindful that while she loved him, she also wanted to stay very separate and, wanted to continue to grow her life, but also figure out a way, though, that they could kind of come together. And things really got expedited when she wound up pregnant. And it wasn't later until we learned that he said that was really his goal. She was an older mom, already had kids outside of this, wasn't really looking to restart a family. All of our conversations were on her future and how she can maximize her business footprint and, protecting her existing kids. But when she got pregnant, she saw it as a blessing, and she did everything to protect that little baby. And during this time, after baby was born, she started to talk to me a little bit about the abuse she was facing. And she didn't come right out and say, I'm being abused, but she kind of used the stereotypical conversations where, he comes home and he's drunk or on drugs, whatever it is. And, he like the entire house doesn't sleep. And she was complaining about some of her coworkers, not giving him a fair shake. But that's because they saw what I later came to see, which is he was having a horrible effect on her life. And it wasn't until it was too late that all of us took action. But, after that baby was born, she told me several times that she wanted to leave him. She wanted to, and trying to figure out how to do it. And like, she wanted to move away, but then it wouldn't work out exactly with the other kids. So we were kind of stuck in this holding pattern. But she told me that by the first of the summer, she wanted to be rid of him. And this guy, he really enjoyed the lifestyle that she was able to afford him. And 4 days later, after she told him she wanted to leave him, she was killed, or she died. We still don't know. It was shocking. I'll never forget that phone call that I received from her friend telling me that she was dead. And instantly, everybody had questions. Everybody. Because this was not a woman that was looking to end her life. The coroner's report stated that she died from hanging. And it just so happens that the boyfriend has a 20-year history of strangling people. One of the hardest lessons I had to learn going through this was how short-staffed the police are. And I believe they mean well. I just don't think they have the resources or the capacity to handle domestic violence situations where there's a lot of gray area. Because we went through the whole process, and despite her body being covered in bruises, despite there being marks around her neck that don't belong to a rope, her death was ruled suicide. And it is very hard to sit across the table from a man that has a history of strangling people and not look at him funny. It was remarkable to see truly how alone my client was. And she didn't have to be. I mean, but she was so terrified of him, whether he killed her or not. There was support for her. There was support, and all she had to do was ask to leave, ask for help to get away from him. And everything we did after she died to protect her baby, to protect the kids, to do everything, all of that could have been done when she was alive. But this woman, who was a total killer, felt like she could take on anybody. And gosh, I have been there. I have felt the same myself. But it wasn't until I realized what the result of not understanding how truly terrifying the person you're sleeping next to is, what that looks like. And a lot of us, when we're in abusive situations, we get desensitized to this situation. It just becomes a part of our normal day life. And I know they had the cops called on them for domestic, incidents, but nothing ever happened of it. She would always take care of it. But nobody quite understood what was going on behind closed doors. It became more and more apparent after her death. But my goodness, everything that we did, if she would have just asked for help, we could have actually saved her. We could have helped her get away from this guy. And it's so confusing to be in this type of situation, because everyone says, why don't you leave sooner? Well, when you're in an abusive situation, the most dangerous time for you to leave is right when you're leaving. I can't remember the statistics, but I think that 75, if not 95, something like that, % of people that are leaving an abusive relationship, they wind up murdered or killed during that time period when they're leaving, because that's when the abuser is losing their control. They're spinning out. Everything they did to keep you down doesn't work, because you finally got the nerve to leave, and they cannot take it. They want to crush you. And so they will literally lose their mind. And the thing people don't realize about strangulation is it is a rage-filled crime. It's something that occurs when you lose your shit and you just can't handle the other person behaving the way that they are. And strangulation is, generally, in my experience, and I've been in an abusive relationship too, and that was the other hard thing to realize, is that how many women came up to me after this and was like, yeah, I was strangled by my boyfriend. Yeah, I was strangled by my partner. And this is just, strangulation is one step away from murder. And it is so easy, actually. You don't even have to die when somebody strangles you, because there can be damage to your throat that it actually takes time. And this is just terrifying, because, in my situation, when I was strangled, I realized I had to play dead to get him to leave me alone. My former partner, Voldemort, he was a rage-filled alcoholic. And so when I was going through my client situation, I could not understand for the life of me why she didn't tell me. At least we talked about the hard stuff. She knew. But I think upon reflection, it is so hard to imagine that this is happening to you. It almost feels like when I was being strangled by Voldemort, it felt like an out-of-body experience where I was watching all of this happen. And then, it's very common to develop dissociative techniques to preserve your soul, to preserve your life, your psyche, when you go through abusive situations. And it doesn't start off completely physical. It kind of begins with that psychological, emotional stuff where, they nitpicking at you and start to go into your psyche. And eventually it leads to this horrible incident where you may or may not walk out with your life. And it is just so pervasive. And people need to know how it's okay if you don't know how to leave. The one thing you just need to do is ask somebody for help.
Yeah, and like you, um, I don't know where you're asking for help came in, but I didn't even see the abuse that I was in when it was happening. You know, I wasn't a high-powered lawyer, but I was a third-degree black belt at the time.
Yeah.
And you know, there was no physical stuff that I was afraid of. It was all of the screaming and yelling that really caused problems. And when you were saying it's the most abusive time or the worst time, the most dangerous time is when we go to leave. And every time I would go to leave the fight, not the relationship, he would attack me in some physical way. I ended up with a broken hand. I got separated ribs from that same fight. And I believe that was the same fight I crawled underneath a pickup truck so I could watch his feet and kick at him to keep him away from me because I just couldn't handle what was taking place. And I did not see that as abuse.
Yeah.
Because I was physically capable of taking care of myself. A couple of years later, when he threw me out of my vehicle and I dislocated my leg, I saw that as abuse. I saw that there was no need for what took place. We didn't even fight. He came in and was drunk, just like you were talking about yours. He was drunk. And so I saw my keys. I grabbed my keys. I ran out to my van, and he got to my door before I could shut it, and he bent the door as I tried to back out. And so I punched him to get him away from the door. I think I broke his nose, but I couldn't grab the door. He threw me out right then. And yet I still stayed for several more months after that. It's crazy what we'll put ourselves through. And I know Joe's been through some very similar stuff in his relationship.
Right. Two of the worst times is when I was getting ready to go, and it was two different occasions. And one time was I was staying in the basement because we were separated in the house, so I slept in the basement. But we get into an argument and it escalates, you know, emotions and that kind of stuff. And so I start putting my pants on, and I got them halfway up, and she jumps on my back and knocks me over. So I'm completely vulnerable. Plus, I'm not going to touch her because that's taboo, you know. And so she jumps on my back, knocks me over. And so I'm holding my pants, and she grabs my pant leg and starts dragging me through the house on the tile and that kind of stuff. And one of my daughters witnessed it. And at that time, that daughter was not on my side, if you want to look at it as sides. You know, I wasn't in her favors. And she just said, give Dad back his keys so he can go. You know, so I guess that was a positive thing, you know. So because the ex did take my keys, she didn't want me going anywhere, but I needed to get out.
Yeah.
So that was one thing. And then the other time, so it did escalate. I did move out. I went to a buddy's house. He lived 0.3 of a mile. So I'd ride my bicycle over and, you know, see the kids and see the ex. She wasn't an ex yet. She was still married. We were still married. And we start getting an argument in the street, and it was a side street, so it wasn't a busy street. And so I'm on my bicycle, and well, I start trying to ride away, and she grabs me, very vulnerable. You can't pedal fast enough. And so I jumped off the bike, and she grabs me, and that's the time that she scratched me and punched me, and I had a bloody nose. So it escalated really severe. She grabs me and bites me through my shirt. So I had blood. I still have the scars today. And and even through all that, I still didn't think about calling anybody that night. I just went to my buddy's house. I don't even think I told him. I'm pretty sure I didn't. And went to bed. And, and then the next day I thought, I need to protect myself and report this. So I did go to the police station, and I had my bloody shirt and, all wadded up, took it in as proof. And I just said, I just want to tell you guys what happened. And then they said, well, we're going to arrest her. And I said, no, I don't want her arrested. So even after, and that's just, I'd rather have the physical abuse. That was way better than the mental years and years and years. It's both bad. Don't put up with, I put up with it. If I could go back, it'd be a whole different story. And of course you can't go back, but anybody going through that, please reach out, and ask for help, because when you're in the middle of it, you're thinking, I can handle this. Yeah, you can handle it, but for how long, and what's going to happen? What's the outcome? You could get, killed, just like what you mentioned. And then, it's just not a healthy thing, and somebody's going to get hurt. The kids could get hurt, et cetera. So, but anyways, they went and arrested her, and that was really tough. And then I was immediately back in the house because she was in jail. Somebody had watched the kids. They were older kids. They were, the youngest ones, I think, were 16 or something like that. So, and we had 6 kids. So there's 3 of them still.
Right.
Yeah,
we still. That's the twins. That's a twins. We
still had 3 of them at home, and so anyways, that's part of my story. And but yeah, if anybody's listening to this and they're being abused, however that abuse looks, get help. Get professional help. And
what I really keyed on when you were talking, Joe, is the fights got bad when you went to leave. You were trying to leave with your pants halfway around your feet, and she attacked you.
Yep.
The next incident was as you were leaving too. And, I can't tell you how unaware of a red flag I was in my relationship. And I didn't realize that red flags that I ignored in the earlier stages literally were going to mean my death. And, Voldemort, I made a lot of excuses for him. He was a drinker. He, he had the ability to be smart, but he never used that reasoning around our relationship. He was brilliant, in his day job. But how he would talk to me during our fights, how he was, emotionally unavailable to see anyone else's perspective but his own. All of these things led to him being able to completely dissociate from reality and perpetrate these heinous crimes. And Voldemort wasn't as bad as my client's boyfriend, but he was really a case study. And she had her rose-colored glasses on, and she wasn't going to see anything different. And it was really hard because she also, I don't think she's ever asked for help. And neither did I, Tina, when you were mentioning that. I didn't even realize, I did actually ask for help. I told my mom that Voldemort was hurting me, and she had not the most supportive response. She told me that I deserved it. And I grew up in a household where my mom was emotionally abusive, very physically abusive to me. And it set me up to have horrible freaking relationships.
Right.
Horrible. And, my mom grew up and she has her own trauma. So I don't fault her for that. I understand that the responsibility lays at my feet to actually form and build healthy relationships. And after Voldemort, I found myself going for Ted Bundy. And I'm like, hold on a minute. Like, what is the common theme within these men? Me. So, it wasn't though, because it was because I wasn't able to understand that if a man or a partner is unable to verbally communicate with you when they become emotionally dysregulated, they are then going to use their animal instincts to control you. So if you can't talk about it, you're gonna have to figure it out some way, and that's not going to be pretty.
Yeah. And you talk about your mom. So back with my first husband, before I got married to him, my mom, this was a horrible event. So my mom didn't like me very much. And so I had a girlfriend over, and so I went to take a shower. I was dating my ex-husband at the time, and I went to take a shower. And during that time, my mom and this friend of mine were in the kitchen talking. And I came out and nobody saw me there. And I overheard my mom telling her, Tina's not good enough for him. You should take him away from her. She's just not good enough for him. Yeah, so very similar to the fact that your mom said that you deserve it. And
Yeah.
then my mom, of course, I divorced my whole family because of the way I left my husband. It did look like I left him for another man. And I kind of did, in the fact that I needed somebody sober. So I couldn't tell my family anything because they were all on my ex-husband's side. So I found a man in AA. And so I just went and lived with him. I moved out and moved right in with him because I didn't have any place safe to go.
Yeah.
And my whole family took my ex-husband's side to the point that when our 2 kids graduated, my family sat with him in graduation. And then in Thanksgiving, we were, I guess it was 4 years later. So it's 4 years later. And now I've moved out. I'm living with my mom actually at this point. And so she invites my ex-husband over. And in this specific day, he takes me down in a chokehold. I didn't fight back because it was in my mother's home, but our youngest son had to pull him off of me. And after he left, my mom was shocked. She says, I never saw that side of him. I said, that's what I've been telling you. I left. After that day, she never called him again.
But it's amazing. She went on 4 freaking years communicating with him after, and this is where it's so hard because we are raised in these systems that justify abuse. It's not even considered abuse, right? It's just, that's how he is. And it only, when you show up with a black eye or they see it for themselves, that they connect the dots and they realize that you were telling the truth. And this is completely uncalled for behavior, but it is so pervasive, and it is disheartening when your own mother is taking their side. I can't imagine that. That's just, you are so strong, Tina. You have a spine made out of steel.
Well, thank you for saying that, because I'll tell you, it didn't feel like that during that time frame. I spent many hours crying because my family chose him. I mean, to the point that my youngest son graduated and my sister came out visiting for his graduation. And I wasn't going to go to my ex-husband's house for the graduation party. It's just not something I felt safe enough doing.
Yeah.
And I had warned both my sister and my ex-husband that they'd better not sleep together. Well, my sister ended up spending the night at the house, and she shared the bed with him. Now I'm 100% sure that they didn't have sex because my cousin was sleeping on the floor next to the bed. But like I told her, I'm like, the door was shut. What do you think all those kids on the other side, your nephews, thought you were doing behind the closed door with 2 men like that?
Yeah.
And to this day, she doesn't even see that and doesn't realize how much that hurt me, and it hurt her nephew. She has no clue, just oblivious.
That's tragic.
Yeah.
I mean,
Very tough.
That's a tough one. When your own family chooses them.
Yeah. And your family was the opposite. Your family.
They could see right through it. And so I didn't have any of that whatsoever. And it was a long road with my family and friends because I had to excommunicate everybody. for years. And it would play by her rules. She set up all these rules.
Yeah.
No one comes to visit unless they set an appointment 2 weeks early. And
Okay.
then, of course, my mom and dad are like, they know she's a control freak. And they told me in private, we're not going to make an appointment to see our grandkids. And I said, I totally get it. So honestly, I tried to keep everybody away because it's so toxic. If they did come over, they'd be scrutinized under a microscope. It wasn't worth it. So I pushed everybody away for years and years and years.
Mhm.
And they knew, they just knew she was sick. Her sickness, she couldn't hide it. She just couldn't be hidden.
Everybody that ever met her knows that. I heard when I started dating him, I ended up he was trying to go to college. So I ended up working for him at his flooring store. And I had people come in and just tell me all kinds of horrible stories about her, things that she had said to them and things she had done. And just, everybody knew who she was. She was a loud one on that level.
In some ways, I feel like that these people are going to behave outrageously. When you have a disordered personality, it comes out. And in some ways, like, they do isolate you with the excommunication of the family. But in the meantime, they're telling everybody who they are. And even in your situation, Tina, your mom finally saw your ex-husband for what he was. But it took that personal interaction with that partner for them to actually have their mind shifted. And it's miserable to live in that no man's land with them being hoisted as the holier than thou than everyone. How hard was it for them to live with you? That was always what my mom would say.
Right.
I'm a mild-mannered book nerd that has rheumatoid arthritis. I don't know. Dust my books. I'm controlling of my books and where they go. But there's so much that goes on behind closed doors. I think a lot of us think that we're doing a really good job of hiding it, but in the end, the people around you have a feeling. And so I think it can be really easy to kind of skip over those people and not want to reach out and tell them. But that's where you can begin. And if you could have one person at least that knows you're in a toxic relationship, if knows that you're dealing with a narcissist or a psychopath, whatever it is, they can start kind of doing some of the work for you. And I've had many clients that are truly terrified of their husbands, where the house is bugged, they have cameras everywhere, and they don't feel comfortable calling me on the phone. So they go out for a walk with the neighbor lady, and the neighbor lady happens to be their best friend. And she gives them their cell phone. And, that's how we communicate. And a lot of these times, it's actually the neighbor lady who finds me. Other people are willing to do the work for you if you're in an abusive relationship, and they want to help you get out. But you just need to know the right person to ask. And if you don't have anybody in your circle, then call the domestic violence hotline. I mean, there's trained people. And even if you think that what you're encountering isn't abuse, chances are it is.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you even have to question it, it is. It's, I'm going to take a couple of steps back when we were talking about choking, how it's such a prominent thing. My mom came home one day from school and found her dad on the floor with her mom and had a belt cinched around her neck, choking her. So these are the types of things, we talked last week about how we're taught to live these kinds of lives, or we're trained to live this kind of life. I come from a farm, and we were taught that a girl marries a man so that he can financially support, and the girl does all of the woman's things, the laundry, the kids, the clothes, all of the cooking and everything. And so we find that even the men back where I'm from were trained in the same kind of way. So it was just a thing. We'd get together and we lived those kinds of lives. And when my mom experienced that as a child. She thought it was what she needed to live through. And my dad wasn't physically abusive, but he was definitely financially abusive to her, which is where, you know, someone like you coming in and showing somebody how much financial abuse is going on would be huge for them. But yeah, that the choking thing is a huge deal. And a lot of people are killed that way.
They are. It is horrendous when you actually look at the statistics, but obviously there's different ways to kill someone, and anything that involves a knife or your hands is considered a rage, or you're almost so mad you're out of your mind, you've lost your mind, and your animal instincts take over. And that's, unfortunately, that happens a lot of the time with domestic violence situations, because the emotions are already heightened. This isn't just somebody, you know, running you off the road. This is, you guys have been going back and forth, and they are looking to control you. And
Right.
I know my situation was going to turn deadly because Voldemort brought a gun into the house. And I thought, oh no, this is where I nope out. I don't trust you to handle yourself under, you know, normal conditions, let alone after a fight when you've been drinking and you want to show me who's boss, because there was a lot of that going on. And, you know, I think Joe kind of had said something interesting earlier where he said the physical abuse almost is easier to navigate because it leaves marks, but it's the emotional and the social stuff, and that's so insidious because it eats away at your soul. And it gets to the point where, you know, like Voldemort slapped me, and I didn't even, very similar to you, Tina, I didn't even consider it abuse. I'm like, I guess this is just what happens in a vulnerable altercation. We are at two different viewpoints, and he's just going to pop me in the mouth if I, you know, continue arguing my side. And, you know, I think a lot of people were so conditioned to think that domestic violence ends up in murder. And it doesn't start there. It might end there, but there is a long fuse that leads up to normally that event. Some people, obviously, they are emotionally unregulated and maybe just do that immediately. But for the most part, there's little breadcrumbs that you can uncover. But it's having, you know, being clear of mind. And most people in a narcissistic relationship are being gaslit day in and day out. I know I was. Right. I mean, if Voldemort told me the sky was purple, I believe him. And it was because I was so conditioned to just give him what he wanted. That, you know, it got to be when our relationship was falling apart, I looked around and I realized, as I was literally hiding in fear behind an armoire, trying to make sure he wasn't going to beat me that night from after he came home from the bar, I just made a promise to God that if I was able to get out from here with my life, I'd help other people. Well, that night, God was on my side, because Voldemort came in and I somehow popped out over the window, fell into a bush, and was able to run and get to the garage and get my car keys before I got hit. And there's so many people that they don't have time on their side. They wind up in the wrong, they stay too long, and then the wrong thing happens, and then their life is over. Right. That was the hardest thing with my client. She was the sweetest woman. She would give you the shirt off of her back, and she was financially stable. And I realized after going on my own healing journey that disordered men and disordered women, they pick the best of the best. They want a highly conscientious person that's going to care for their emotions, that's going to subvert their own needs for the good of the group. That's how they can really get in there and start to weave their poison. So I think a lot of people have shame and fear and guilt surrounding the fact that they've been abused. But in some ways, it's because you're so awesome that they wanted to keep you and control you for themselves. So you have to dispel with those negative beliefs and get rid of that thought process that I should have done this sooner. Human beings are horribly complicated. And I don't know if your listeners and viewers are aware of something called a trauma bond, but this is something that occurs, when you're being in an abusive relationship. The cycle of abuse actually gets your brain chemically addicted to the oxytocin and the dopamine that's released after the abuse, and the love bombing starts. It's this like horrible cycle that really uses your brain against itself. And I guess I've kind of figured out that, especially for women, it wasn't that long before we were living in with Vikings raping and pillaging women, or whatever warring tribe it was. And so you'd have two male tribes, or two groups of men killing each other, and then the victors would go take the men who died, their wives. And literally, we would be forced to reproduce and have relationships with the men that killed our husbands. And as a result of that, I believe our brains have this maladaptive pattern in which we start to cling to our abusers. Because, back in this time period, there was no iPhone, there was no supermarket. You were just, if you didn't go with the victor, then you would be, dead or killed, or something even worse. So I have seen a lot of it with my clients where they don't understand their brains, right? They I want to get away from him. I've been working on this divorce for the last 2 years. And then when I finally tell him, he's like, oh, he takes full accountability of it. And now I don't know what to do. He's in therapy. I'm like, well, is he actually working on himself? Or is this the love, the cycle of abuse has gotten bigger because his situation has changed? So you really have to understand how your brain works to heal that trauma bond, because so many of us our bodies are still behaving as if we belong to men that killed our husbands.
Right.
And you have to break those chains. And I'm sure it works similarly for men as well, but our brains work against each other.
Yeah, we're handpicked, that's for sure. And I've read 3 books on it, and they relate to that abuser as a vampire, and we're the source, we're the blood. And they pick that, I'm just going to say, naive, kind person that could supply them full of all kinds of, I'll destroy you is what the deal is. And that's like a trophy.
Yeah.
And to try to get away from that is sometimes impossible, but I mean, it's impossible if you get killed. I mean, don't hang around that long is what I'm saying. So
you've got to see the signs, and then you've got to make the steps out.
Right.
And so as we get ready to come to end today, so that's one of the things that we need our viewers to understand is that it will only get worse. It will never get better. It will always get worse. It starts with yelling, and then it may start with a little bit of they throw an object and hit the wall on the opposite side of the room of you. And pretty soon they're throwing objects at you. And then pretty soon they're punching the wall next to you, and then they're punching you. And talked about the choking. And as a martial arts instructor and a self-defense instructor, I always tell women that, yes, to get trained in self-defense, but make sure that training is also some groundwork, because inevitably I think it was 98% of domestic fights end up on the ground. The man takes the woman to the ground. So those are kind of important. So I want to kind of talk for just a minute about your work, Victoria. So how can people find you, and exactly what do you do?
Well, the best way to get a hold of me is through my website, divorceanalytics.com. I always respond to emails or texts. You can give me a shout out at 402-430-3092. Sometimes that's the only way you have to get in contact with me, and I just really want to make sure I'm available. But my role, as I mentioned earlier, divorce primarily is a financial event that has an emotional and a legal coupling. And so it's especially when you're dealing with a disordered person, it's when their livelihood, their supply, as Joe so eloquently put it, when that is threatened, that's when you have the rage-filled emotions, and then you end up in a litigated divorce case. But my role as a divorce financial analyst is to really understand each person's motivations and to develop property division settlements, as well as spousal support and child support calculations, to help placate and alleviate those fears. Most people, to begin with, have no idea what they currently own, what they own, or what they have. So when it comes down to divorce, you have to figure out your income and expenses as well as your balance sheet. And when you have all of your financial facts in place, you're able to approach your divorce, especially if you're dealing with a disordered person, like a business deal. Because hands down, this is going to be the biggest deal of your life. And it's when you don't have your financial facts that you end up with too big of a legal bill, and you don't really get the outcome you want. But even more so when you're dealing with a disordered person, they will use the legal system to continue their abuse if they have enough funds. And they will drag you through court case after court case and hearing, and it's insane. And so through my own experience, I have found that by preparing a divorce impact analysis report, which is essentially the financial facts of the relationship and how to divide it, and taking a proactive approach when you're dealing with the disordered person, you take a lot of the fight out of the dog. Depending on the type of situation, obviously not everybody can be worked with, but for the most part with a disordered person, the divorce is financially going to impact them. And it's from that fear that they don't have the understanding that they're going to lash out at you and they're going to make it worse. So you try to kind of take a preemptive start and begin with an end in mind and show them, hey, like, I want a divorce. And oh, by the way, guess what? You're going to be fine because I've calculated out that our lifestyle is $10,000 a month and you're going to get at least $5,000 in support. And this is the financial facts to back it up, or whatever that is. But when you actually take a proactive approach, you start the process off on the right foot, because it's very hard. The legal system does not care that you're dating a narcissist or you're married to a narcissist. They do not care. They only care, about like what you own, what you owe, what you make, and what you spend. And they just pretty much divide it all in half. But there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes. And when you're dealing with a conflict-prone person, you need to build a divorce team out that can handle that. Otherwise, you're going to be in a world of hurt and you're not going to get the outcome you desire.
So true, so true. And the more money you make, the more you definitely need that. And I often talk about, to my clients where we need to get a hold of Victoria, because Victoria is going to be able to give us a rundown of where you're at financially. So it's one of the most important things that you go through in the divorce from the divorce coaching side, is to get a competent and very understanding CDFA that's there to, and especially where you have worked with the same kind of clients that I work with. That's just it's like bread and butter. They go together.
Absolutely. And I think you hit the nail on the head, Tina. Really, to have a good divorce team, you need a coach that's going to help you regulate those emotions, because it's going to be hard, especially if you're dealing with a high conflict personality type. And you really need somebody like Tina and Joe that can help you weave together these communication strategies. Somebody who has been there, done that, and they have the t-shirt. I mean, real world experience goes a long way when dealing with narcissists, because you actually need to know what a gray rock technique looks like and sounds like. When you have kids, it's even more complicated, because you are going to have a continuing relationship. The court, even if you were abused during the marriage, for some reason, most courts, they think after the divorce is over, the abuse is going to go away and you guys can just deal with the kids, lickety split. Well, that's not true. And so you can use a divorce coach to help you develop these communication techniques that are going to keep the other areas of your divorce lower conflict, so you can work with that person. And at the end of the day, even the most disordered clients that I've dealt with, they still are motivated by making sure they're going to have a landing pad, a financial landing pad after the divorce is over. And when you are able to talk in terms that are meaningful to them, you actually move the divorce process forward. So you don't have to rely on going to litigation to get your resolution.
Right, right. And if we can stay out of litigation, that's what we need to. In most cases with a narcissist, it's very difficult to stay out of the litigation, but that's the direction we should head and want to head. So as we come to an end, I want to remind our listeners that if you are in a domestic violence situation right now, call 911. Call 911, or if you're in the UK, 999. Get the police there right now. And like Joe often says, he says, you know, make the report, press the charges, and keep the charges pressed. Don't take the charges off, because that is your doorway to get out. Okay. The other thing is our domestic violence hotline is 800-799-7233. And that number again is 800-799-7233. And we'll have Victoria's information with this video, so make sure that you look for that. And if you want to get a hold of me, you can reach me via my email at coachtinalyn@gmail.com. That's CoachTinalynn@gmail.com. And my webpage is divorcecoachspecialist.com. So if you need to get a hold of us for any reason, please reach out and always ask for help. So Victoria, do you have any final suggestions?
I would just remind you that you are so much stronger than you realize, especially if you're facing an abusive situation. You don't know the strength that you have inside of you. And this is going to be your opportunity to fight and advocate for yourself. And don't take anything for granted. This is your one life that you have to live. And all you have to be is just brave for one moment. If you can't be brave for a whole day, you just have to be brave enough to make the phone call and then ask for help. And people will step in and help wherever they can. Just be brave for 5 minutes. You can do it.
Right.
Anything that you need to add?
That was great advice. And when I say don't drop the charges on when I filed, and I I dropped them after 2 weeks because whatever. And so that's why I say don't drop them, because it's abusive, and get the heck out. So, and don't look back. And I did. So I learned the hard way.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, thank you very much, Victoria.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
And we wish you all the very best. Thank you.